See, a normal woman, all of her husband's assets are meshubit to pay her ksuba. So she feels pretty secure in her marriage. But a Yavama who's married to her brother-in-law, none of his own personal assets are gleaned to pay her ksuba. Only the assets that her husband left over that her second husband now owns. Because she's at a little bit of a disadvantage, we tell him, the new husband, that these assets you're not allowed to touch at all. So a normal husband, all of his assets are leaned, but he could sell them. You're allowed to sell the property, even though your property is leaned to your wife for ksuba. You're still allowed to sell the property, and if you won't be able to pay, she'll go and collect from whoever purchased it. But Vibalta Yavam is at a disadvantage that not all of her second husband's properties are leaned. Only those properties that came from her first husband, the second husband is not allowed to sell those properties. He has to keep all of the assets intact. So she's guaranteed. And the Mishnah says even more. Even if he plunks down a diamond, that's her ksuba is worth 100,000, and he plunks down a diamond that's worth $1 million, and tells her, "This is for your ksuba. Could I sell?" You still don't let him sell, because we want that extra level of security for her that all of her first husband's assets will always be there. That's what we saw in our Mishnah. We also saw in our Mishnah, even if they're more than the ksuba. That's right. Even if they're more than the ksuba. That's right. So the Gemara here says, what happens if a shemeres yovam died? Shemeres yovam shemesa. So we learned in the Mishnah that there's a little bit of a controversy as to what happens to her nechasim. Does her father's yashim, does her family yashim them? Does his family yashim them? Who's more in control? Right? We had a machlokes b'sham and b'silo. If you split them all, or if you look at each asset class individually and see who has more control over it, but she's in the middle. We also know that why is it that a man is mechuyev to bury his wife? Everything is tit for tat in a marriage. It's because he got natan. Because of the natan that he got, that she brought into the marriage, that's why he has to bury her. So if you have a shemeres yovam shemesa, this woman is in limbo. She's in between two husbands. Mi koivra. Who is responsible to bury her? And Rashi says, since she has two sets of yarshin, her husband's side and her father's side, so who has to bury her? There are those who learn for sure the husband's side have to bury her, the family also have to help, but the Pashto Shah is who is the Yarsh who's responsible to bury her? Zaktamar, do you say Yarshe Habal Kavrila? Do you say that the Yarshim of the husband buries her? The Kayarshi Ksuba, because they're Yarshining her Ksuba. What did we say in Basil? What are they Yarshining in the Ksuba? Are they Yarshining any land, any property? The Mishnah doesn't say that. The Mishnah says what they Yarshin is the Mana or Masai, what he would have had to otherwise pay. The problem with that is, we just said a second ago, in the tit for tat arrangement between the husband and the wife, the reason why the husband has to bury the wife is not because of the ksuba money, it's because of the natan that she brought in. So here, the new husband, or the shemeres yovam, all he received is that he didn't have to pay her the manu masayim. So why in the world should that oblige him to bury her? Right? That's a problem. How does the Gemara understand that? So we have a very simple little Tosfos who answers the kasha. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Oh, Dilma.
Who gets the parents?
The parents of the dead brothers will be his surviving brother.
Right.
But that he actioned from his brother. That he didn't action from her. If she brings Nadin into the marriage,
if he doesn't marry her, then she would get nothing.
If he doesn't marry her, then him and all his brothers will split it evenly. She doesn't action her husband. She gets her ksuba. So the question is, what Nadin is she bringing into the second marriage that should entitle her to be buried? So Zog Tosfos asks a very good question. V'im Toimar, I am like 4 lines down in the Tosfos. So it's about 6 lines from the bottom of the Amud. V'im Toimar, my kamaboyle. What is the question? For Tanya La'il, we learned earlier that Kivurasa Taras Kesubos Tanya Dudaisa. It's for the Natan that she's bringing in. What Natan is she bringing in to the second marriage? V'yeshloimar. No, this is not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for an earlier Tosfos. I'm looking for an early Tosfos. Oh, here it is. The first Tosfos, Yarshe Abal. The second to the bottom Tosfos. Yarshe Abal, a cover law the kayarshik subasa. In terms of fictitious, the parish of contras, the ain liyarshe abal elamona umasayim v'loy nedunya. According to the Rashi, who learns that all the yarshe abal get to keep is the money masayim that they don't have to pay her. V'armina beperik nair the kfurasa tachas midunyaisa mideinachayiv likbar v'sosai. You don't have to bury a woman who you're only oris to. Why? Because she didn't bring a nadin yet. You only get the nadin by the nesuin. So why in the world should the husband here, the second husband here, be obliged to bury her if he didn't receive nadin? So look at Tosfos' cheshbon. The Yeshlam is like Tosfos. The shemeres yavim haisaruya lidel ksas monu masayim. Technically, her husband dies. Once her husband dies and she's an almana, she should be entitled to be paid out the ksuba of the monu masayim. Kidam askinin the yavim ka'achadam. We're soon going to see the Gemara is going to say that the Yavam isn't considered like her husband taking over. The Yavam is considered another man. What's the difference? The difference is if her husband's not there anymore, that triggers a chiyuv to pay her ksuba. So since her husband died, even though there's a Yavam in the picture, that triggered a chiyuv to pay up her mana umasayim. So therefore, since she's entitled to that mana umasayim, and we're not forcing him to pay it because he's going to marry her during that period where he's prepared to marry her. It's as if she brought her in. It's as if she brought in the dunya. So what I'm saying is very simple. Your wife comes home, and you come home, and she tells you, "Honey, I saved you $1,000 today." And you say, "Yeah, put it on the table. I'd like to see the $1,000 that you saved me." Right? You don't have to. In other words, where did you save it? But here you see that's a good time. You really would have had to pay me ksuba, but since we're making evil, you don't have to pay me ksuba, so I brought you that money. Honey, I saved you money. Why? Because you're not getting ksuba. And Zok Toshes, that's considered nothing. By Rehi Zok Toshes, Kilo Notla, it's as if she took the Mana Umasayim, which was the ksuba that she was entitled to from her deceased husband, and she gave it back to him. So that's the nadin that she's bringing into the marriage, the fact that she's saving him having to pay the money masayim. Okay. Don't say this at home because it's going to cost you.
So his responsibility, I'll bury you.
I'll bury you. That's right. Who would they be? I mean, we'll learn about the Basra, about not but it could be the father's brother, the father's sons, whoever they would be.
The lady's father's son.
It could be the lady's father, meaning her brothers, right? Or it could be her uncles. I'm sorry?
Same person, the other.
It's her father's side. It's her father's side. Okay. Zok to Gemara. So Yoshia Baal Kavrila, the Kayarsi Ksuba, because they're getting the Ksuba. And as Tosfos says, it's like she took it and then she brought it in as an Adam. Oidilma Yoshia Av Kavrila, or maybe her family is responsible to bury her. The Kayarsi Nechosim HaNechnosim Vayotnima. All of the Nichsim Alug, they're going to get back. Omer of Amram, Zokar Rabban Toshma, I want to bring you a ride. The Tanya we learned, Shemeris Yavim Shemes, a Shemeris Yavim that died, which I believe is our Mishnah. The halacha is, I'm sorry, this is not our Mishnah, I apologize, this is a Brisa. Yorsha, her Yorshim, Yorshe Kesubos, the people who Yarshin Ksuba, a funny double ocean. Yorsha, the people who Yarshin her, Yorshe Kesubos, who Yarshin Ksuba, Chayovin Bikfurasa. They are mechuyev to bury her. Zok Rashi, Yorsher Yoshik Suba, Oisin Yorshim, She Yorshin Ksubasa, Chayavim Bikfurasa. Those who Yarshin Ksuba are Chay Biksubasa, which means the Baal. The Baal has to, because it's the Yorsher Baal who Yarshin Ksuba. The Manu Masayim, which is her Ksuba, is going to the Baal, and therefore he has to bury her. Amar Abaye, Afananamitinina. We also have a brisa to support this halacha. It says as follows: Almana nizonis menichsiyasam. An almana is allowed to sustain herself from the estate. Umay siyadeh shalahen. And because of that, because she's sustaining herself from the estate, what she produces, she has to kick back into the estate. Be'ein chayoven bikfurasa, but they're not mechuyev to bury her. Yorshel, her Yorshim, Yorshik Subasa, the one who Yarshin Ksuba, they are Chayavin Bikfurasa. So let's see Rashi. The Ein Chayavin Bikfurasa, the estate, the boy the Mesav Ksubasa Liyarshel, because she has to give the Ksuba to her Yorshim. So Zok the Gemara, Vezehu almana sheyesh lo shnei yorshim. From this brayz, it's mashma that there's two yorshim here. Why? So Rashi shnei yorshim. The itzruch latana lemisni. The Tana to specify which specific yorshim are the ones who have to bury her. And what does it say? Oisan yorshim sheyorshim Kesubos. Which yorshim are responsible to bury her? Not any Yerush, only the Yerush who yorshim Kesubos. Shmamina ika yorshim achrina ba'adayu. You see that there's other yorshim as well. The yorshim Kesubos, like her family. Her family does not yarshim Ksuba. They yarshim her nichsei malog. Those aren't the people who bury her. It's the yorshim Kesubos that are chayavim b'kfuras. Vezahi, who is that? Vezahi almana sheishlos yarshim have oimer zu shemeres yavim. The only type of almana who could have two sets of yarshim is a shemeres yavim, because if she's not connected to another husband, well, then everything gets yarshim by her family. It's only because she's shemeres yavim does the husband's family have a connection to her, because the yavim has the rights to her in the husband. Amar Rava, Zok Rava, why is it that the brother, the Yavim, has to bury her? Why can't he get out of burying her? With the following argument. V'lema, achani Yerush. I'm not yarshening her. I'm yarshening my brother. Zok Rashi, Ksuba zu shani Yerush, ein kan minedunyas avia klom. This does not include any of the Nadan. So clearly Rashi saying that, let him say, I disagree with Tosfos, that says that the fact that I don't have to pay her the money Mosayim is as if she got it and gave it to me. No, I'm not getting anything from the original Nadin that she brought into the marriage. All I'm getting, all I'm getting is the money that my brother promised to her. Therefore, I am only yashing my brother. I'm not yashing her. And therefore, Ishtoi ain't any kover. Therefore, I have no reason to want to bury her, because I got nothing from her. Amar le Abaye said that's not a good time. Mishum the boy malov mishnei tzad, because we're going to get him from both sides, and we're going to tell him the following: Im achav yoyreish, if you yashin your brother, then you're going to yashin all the responsibilities that your brother has, and therefore yikvar es ishtoi. And Rashi says, Kamoy shoyahu koivra in mesu b'chayav. If you are standing in your brother's place, you are yashining his estate. Well, then, had he been alive when his wife died, he would have been mechuyev to bury her. Now that you're standing in his shoes, you have to bury her. Even though she brought you nothing, the fact is you are now standing in your brother's shoes, and she brought nothing in to your brother. And if you refuse to bury his wife, your sister-in-law, then you should have to pay up her ksuba. Since you're not willing to bury her, then you should have to give her back the nadan that came in, or the ksuba. So why in the world, Rava, are you saying that he should be able to weasel his way out of burying? Omerlei, Rava said, Hachi kamina. This is what my argument would be. Achi ani Yerush, I am yarshening my brother, but I'm not going to bury his wife. And if it's because of ksuba that you said a minute ago, that if I'm going to stand in his shoes, I should have to give her her ksuba. Never do you pay ksuba when the husband's still alive, right? You only pay ksuba when the husband dies. Whenever the husband's alive, you don't pay ksuba. And now I'm standing in my brother's shoes. So if I'm standing in my brother's shoes, let's perceive this scenario as if my brother is still alive. And if my brother is still alive, there is no chiv ksuba yet. The islay, I'm sorry. I was planning to marry her. I was planning to do yibum. So I'm in my brother's feet. I'm in his shoes. And since we're still alive, there has never yet been a chiv of ksuba triggered. Therefore, the imishum ksuba nitna ksuba ligvois mechai. Zok to Gemara to Rava, that's not going to be a good argument, because it gets very tripped up. Now, where did we get this from? That nitna ksuba ligvois mechai. It only comes from the fact that we're medayik carefully in the exact wording of the ksuba. Man shamaslay the isle medus ksuba. Who is the mandomer who holds that you're medayik in the wording of the ksuba, and because of that you say that loynitna ksuba ligbois machai? And what is this relevant to? Rashi says, Man shamaslay the isle medus ksuba shedoirish lashna ksuba, that analyzes the words of the ksuba shekaseva. The words of the ksuba are lichesheti nasi la'acher. When you will have your free pass to marry anybody you want, you're free totally from this union. Only then, titli masha kasavuchi. Only then are you entitled to collect your ksuba. Yes, when she's able to marry somebody else, when she's free to marry somebody else. No, it means I'm sorry. I was saying that because it's relevant to this case, but in fact, it's the same thing. It's as long as she's still tied down and she cannot marry anybody who she wants because she's tied down by the marriage, then she's not entitled to ksuba. Once she's free to marry anyone she wants, whether because of a death or equally because of a divorce, that's when the ksuba becomes payable. So the minah daikas, that's where we darshan from that lo nitna ksuba ligvish mechayim. The ha'ena yechayla linasi la'ach. So who is the mandamer who says that you analyze a ksuba in that fashion? It's Beis Shammai. Where did Beis Shammai say that? We learned this in Yevamis, and this will be familiar. So I'm learning Rashi, Beis Shammai be Yevamis, beperka isa shaholcha. The Krami Beis Shammai, the halacha is that Beis Shammai says that once a woman is believed that her husband dies, not only do we let her remarry, we also give her her ksuba. We believe her that her husband dies, that we even let her collect her ksuba. And Basila at first argues with Beis Shammai, and Beis Shammai says there's two reasons why she should be able to collect the ksuba. First of all, if we're being matter in Ashes Isla Shuk, which is very chomer, based on her testimony, we should surely trust her enough to get her the couple of dollars of her ksuba. And the second raya Beis Shammai brought to argue that she's entitled to her ksuba is because those are the words of the ksuba. The ksuba says, the moment you are released to be able to marry somebody else, no matter how you're released. So we discussed if he dies, and we discussed if he's mugareshes. But she's also released if she comes and says testimony that her husband dies. We release her there as well. So that's also, you're medayik from the ksuba. If she's released for any reason, she's entitled to collect her ksuba. So it's Beis Shammai who's medayik. It reads very much into those words of lichesheti nasi la'acher. So the Kami Beis Shammai, from the words of her ksuba itself, we would learn and understand that once she's free, even if it's on her own word, she's entitled to collect the ksuba, because it says lichesheti nasi la'acher, when you are free to marry someone else, hitli ma shekasavchi. You may take what I wrote into you for the ksuba.
Is this a fair on Beis Shammai? The fact that the ksuba is bein open lachaveroi, and just because Hakadosh Baruch Hu is let's say loyal or not to the shul, because the Bezin is going on behalf of Hakadosh Baruch Hu, it's bein open lachaveroi. Who says the people are
Because the husband wrote, if for whatever reason you're free to marry, I'll pay you.
Oh,
It's not my.
so one's dependent on the other.
Yeah, he said for any reason, if you're free, that's going to trigger my chiyuv to pay you. So Zok Rashi v'hoyel v'hi nisis al pi atzma, since we're letting her get married, even though we're based on oral testimony, Shabbos v'amra meis baili, she said my husband died. Therefore, av kesubasa goy val pi atzma. She's entitled to collect her ksuba. So who is the one? So who are you relying on to be matter? Who are you relying on to have her collect the ksuba? You're relying on the halacha of Beis Shammai who says, where do you know that from? You know from the so that means you're relying on Beis Shammai. That's really good. However, Beis Shammai said something else that's going to cut you down. Because if you're a little Beis Shammai, then you can't pick and choose in Beis Shammai. If you want to follow Beis Shammai, you have to follow through completely. And Beis Shammai said something else. He said, the Amri Shtar ha'oimid ligvois kegavudami. Any star that's going to be collected from, we look at it as if it's being collected already. So Rashi says, if Reuben has a star that says that Shimon owes him money, he has more control over the loiva's assets than the loiva himself. We consider it collected. So therefore, we'll look at it like the nechasim are in her rishos. But if you want to hold like Beit Shammai and say because of that the Chi of Ksuba had not yet been triggered, well, even the fact that he has the Ksuba written from his wedding, that's enough to say that she already has control of the assets because of the other rule that Beit Shammai said of Kaloim and Ligos Kagavudami. She's holding a star choiv on him. Any married woman is holding a star choiv on her husband. She's holding that ksuba, and therefore we look at it like a church already. So in fact, this brother is getting back from her money, and if he is getting back from her money, he should be responsible to bury her. The Tanan we learned. Where did Beit Shammai tell us that kala oimid liglos kagavudami? From the following case: a woman is a soita. So if a woman is a soita, she's also to her husband until she drinks from the mesoita. But what happens if it's mesu balein achalei shasu? Their husband died, and now they're in limbo. They can no longer drink the mesoita if the husband's not alive. We learned it from the psukim. So what do you do with this woman? She wins. Noitless ksuba v'lo shoisais. She gets to claim the ksuba, even though she was also to her husband at the time of his death because she was soiser. Nevertheless, she's exonerated now, and she even gets to collect her ksuba.
But she wasn't looking for anybody else. It was a Russian ksuba. So you were free to marry anybody else.
Yeah, but he died now. No, before he died, as soon as he died, she can collect her ksuba. But she's not also to a boil. We don't even know if there is a boil. We don't know who the milkman is.
Right. So when
And Beisila says, "Oy says she either has a choice. She can either drink from the Mesaita, and if she won't drink from the Mesaita, oy noitless ksuba." What do you mean she has the option to drink? Oy says it says vehevi ha'ishes ishtoi elakoid omerachmana. Of course you can't drink. Ella, that's what Beisila meant. Mitoich shaloi says. She has a choice: either drink or you don't get your ksuba. But she doesn't have the ability to exercise the option to drink. It's like it comes in any color as long as you only like yellow, right? So therefore loy noitlos ksuba. Zok the Gemara, but Beit Shammai argues, and he says noitlos ksuba. She gets to take her ksuba. So the problem is why? Why would Beit Shammai hold that she can take a ksuba? It's a moitzi mechaveri all of araya. V'amai sveikahu. It's a suffix if she's entitled to the ksuba because maybe she was mizana. Suffix zanoi, suffix loy zanoi. Yet we're still letting her collect the gaasi suffix umoitzi midei vadai. How could that be? It must be because kasavri Beit Shammai star ha'oimid ligvois kagavadami. It must be that Beit Shammai holds that we look at her like she's already in possession of the money from the ksuba, and therefore, even though there's a suffix here, we will still let her collect on the ksuba. So going back to our sugya, Rava, he doesn't have a right to say that he doesn't want to bury her because he didn't get any Yerusha from her, because since in order to say that, you have to rely on Beit Shammai, who says and say that there was never a chiv ksuba, a chiv to actually pay the ksuba triggered. It doesn't matter. Beit Shammai held even before the chiv of ksuba was triggered, they're still considered in her rishus because of star ha'im ligvos kagavudami. So you're back stuck, Rava. How could he claim I don't want to bury her? Zok to Gemara, I don't understand. V'ba'inon kishetinase la'acher titli mashakosavchi. Even if it's star, but at the end of the day, she's not able to collect it now. Zokt Rashi, it's ala ilpark. We're going back on what we said earlier. Soif. At the end of the day, how could she say that how could we say that he got something from her? At the end of the day, he didn't get anything from her. So soif heich ksuba nigvis mechayim. There's no way he could collect. She has a right to collect the ksuba when he's still alive. Now, do you want to say Mimonashech, either give her ksuba or bury her? How could you tell me to give her ksuba? I don't want to bury her, and you can't force me to give her ksuba. I'm alive. So at the end of the day, practically speaking, how could you force me to pay up her ksuba if I refuse to bury her? Rabashi, and this was the chiddush we mentioned earlier, Yovim nami kachadami. We actually say that we have already triggered that trigger of keshetinasi lacher. Even though I plan to marry her and I'm not actually going to have to pay her because I'm still alive, I'm still considered someone other than her husband. And we will say that that's enough of a trigger to say that there was a virtual chiyuv for him to give her the mois ksuba. We don't force him to give it because he's yarshening his brother, but that's considered that he received from her, and therefore, in fact, he would be mechuyev to pay ksuba if he didn't want to bury her. Okay, so that takes us to the end of this sugya. At the end of the day, we had a question: who buries this woman who's a shemer sheyavim in between two husbands? The consensus of the Gemara seems to be that we force the husband to bury her. The yavam. Shalach le Rav Abaye biyad Rav Shmaya bar Zeir. Rava sent a message to Abaye with Rav Shmaya bar Zeir, and he asked the following question: Umi nitna ksuba ligvos mechayim? Is it true that ksuba was nitna ligvos mechayim? Can you possibly argue that? Vatanya, we learned in a brisa.
Okay.
Rabbi said, they asked the following question. If somebody wants to sell from his brother's nechasim, so what happened is his brother died and didn't leave over any children. And now he has these nechasim that he's not allowed to touch because they have to remain as collateral for the ksuba of this woman. He's not allowed to touch those nechasim, but he wants to. So is there any loophole? Is there any way he can get around the prohibition of selling these assets? So, how do you do it? If he's a kohen who, if he divorces her, he will never be able to marry her again. What he should do is, he married this woman already. He married his brother's almana. So what he should do is, yasa suda, he should make a delicious meal to put her into a good mood via fais, and he should try to convince her and get her to allow him to sell those assets. So Zokt Rashi, after he married her, we mentioned earlier, and he can't sell them. So he won't be able to marry her. He has to try to convince her. I mean, in today's world, it would be buy her diamond, send her on a vacation with her friends, give her a night out.
Why does it want to go through trouble saying trying to, wine and dine it? Just say if she willing to get her to agree.
The Gemara is giving some advice how to get her to agree. How to get her to agree. We want to convince her to, let's say the chsub is only $10,000 and there's $100 million worth of assets. He wants to convince her, let me sell some of it. Al kadei ksuba, over and above what her ksuba is worth, so there's no risk. But if he's Yisrael, then he doesn't even have to ask her. He can force it. What will he do? Megarish beget. He can actually divorce her. Once he divorces her, he pays her a ksuba and it's all over. And now he marries her fresh. When he marries her fresh, it's a brand new ksuba. And every normal man can sell any asset he wants. Even though the assets are meshubah to the ksuba, if he can't pay, they'll collect from them. But right now, he can sell.
If she wants to get remarried.
I don't know if you've noticed, but this Gemara Kesubos is very much from a male perspective.
She's loaded.
Right.
She's loaded.
Why is she loaded? No, she only gets her on the Messiah. Yeah. Yeah.
Where's the money?
The money, but he actually his brother. Yeah. Yeah, he got the money. Im Yisraelu Megarish beget v'yachzer. I mean, she still needs him to improve her karka. So Im Yisraelu, if he's a Yisrael, what he could do is he could be Megarish beget v'yachzer, and he can take her back. So let's see Rashi how this plan will work. The Im Yisraelu shemuter lahachzer grishosai, where he could divorce a wife and then marry her again. Megarish beget. First he'll give her a divorce. Umagves ksubas, and he'll pay her ksuba in full. And once he pays her ksuba in full, he's completely severed from her, and now he has scot-free all of his brother's nechasim, and he can sell whatever he wants. And then umachsira almanas ksubasa rishona, Oh, he could, even if he takes her back. We learned earlier, if a man divorces his wife and takes her back, it goes back to the original conditions. So even if it snaps back, and like Trump's snap back of the sanctions, if the Iranians don't keep to their end of the deal, even if it snaps back to the original, but in that gap, in that lapse when he divorced her, he was able to sell whatever he wants. Or if he wants to be machzer right away, moicher he can sell kol zman sheyir, it says as much as he wants. She can't stop him. Elo Yavama, only the Yavama can stop. So why is it that only a Yavama can stop him from selling? The Yavam does not write a ksuba to his wife. It's just relying on the ksuba from his brother. Because of law, the kanoi u'the kanina. A normal husband writes, any nechasim that I bought or I will buy in the future, everything I have and everything that I'll ever have is meshubah to your ksuba. That's when you're married, when you marry this wife from the first time. When you do yibum, none of that applies. You don't owe her anything. The only assets that are meshubah to the ksuba are those assets. Therefore, that's the reason why she has the right to prevent him from selling anything. You know why? Because she needs security. And even if you were leaving plenty of assets not sold that will pay up her ksuba, she still has a concern. Maybe those assets that you didn't sell that you kept for her ksuba, they'll get messed up. There'll be a storm. There'll be a hurricane. So she doesn't want to take any chances. So then that's the Eitzah. So let's see what the Gemara says. So he can divorce her, then he can do whatever he wants, and then he can take her back if she wants him back. So those are the Eitzahs to get around it. If you're going to hold that nitna ksuba ligvois mechayim, we already look at it like she collects mechayim. So let me ask you a question. If I borrow money from you, I borrow from you $100,000 that I'm going to pay you back in 6 months, right? Do I have a right to come back to you after months? I want to pay you back now. Avad I do. You guys say no. I don't want the money back for 6 months. I have the right to pay you back early. So here too, when it comes to ksuba, if the ksuba could be nikba mechayim, let him pay her the ksuba right now. And if I pay you the ksuba right now I'm free and clear to sell. Why do I have to divorce her and do this? I have a right to pay a choy before it becomes due. So let's look at it like he's paying her up now. Let him give her whatever she wants now, and then let him sell. I'm sorry, but he's paying her back. He's paying her back. That's when it's triggered. If I say I'm borrowing money from you and then paying you back in 6 months. So let's say I borrow money from you and the star says I want to pay you back in 6 months. I'm allowed to pay you back early. You can't claim it earlier, but I can pay it back earlier.
Is there any downside?
Huh?
Is there any downside to paying back the super early?
For her? Yeah, well, her money will get messed up. No, the downside is because it's not about the money. She wants security in her marriage. We're going to soon see.
Right, so
she's very upset when he pays up her
The
tshuva.
reason why you can pay back early with a regular plate is because there is no downside.
Oh, so that's the Gemara. That's what the Gemara is going to say. Zogt the Gemara. It's a very good kasha you're asking. But who are you asking the kasha from? You're asking the kasha on a brisa that was brought down from a Baba. Why would you ask a kasha from a brisa? Our Mishnah basically says the same thing. V'loisva mimas nisim. Why don't you ask this same kasha from our Mishnah? What did our Mishnah say? You're not allowed to tell her, here's a diamond that's worth way more than your ksuba could possibly be worth, and now let me sell the other assets. Rather, the entire estate of his late brother is mishubit, and he can't just pay her back. So if our Mishnah says the same thing, you're going to ask me a kasha from Rab Abba and a Brisa? It's much better if you ask a kasha from a Mishnah. So no, the Mishnah I would interpret differently. I would interpret the Mishnah as just saying Hasam Eitza Toiva Kamashma. There, the Mishnah is just giving us an Eitza Toiva, not to accept Metalfin. Shema Yovda Metalfin. Metalfin can get lost. Then just below Ksuba, and then she'll get stuck without a Ksuba. If he designates this metalfin for a ksuba and it goes missing, well, then he has to write a new ksuba. So the Mishnah might not be saying that it's illegal, he can't financially do that. The Mishnah might be saying it's not a good idea. Don't do it, because you could lead to trouble. I'm sorry. Ella kol nechasav achron l'ksubos. That's what the Mishnah says. That's just it's a tova. The loite machi. I'm going to prove to you that the Mishnah is not paskening like that unequivocally. The Mishnah is just giving me an eitzah not to tell us to your yavama, because Seifa, the Mishnah also said the same statement regarding a normal husband and wife. Every husband and wife, the husband has a right to sell any property he wants. It's lien, but he has a right to sell it. And even legabe a regular husband and wife, the Mishnah says the same thing. A regular man is never allowed to tell his wife, here's the money for your ksuba. You can't say that to her. Rather, all of his assets are liened for his wife. Zok to Gemara, when it comes to a regular wife, no one's going to suggest that a husband cannot sell any of his assets just because they're liened. A babi could. So what the Mishnah must mean when it says lo yomer adam lishtoi, it's got to be just an eitzah tova. So when the Mishnah is telling a regular person not to designate metalton to the ksuba, it's just giving him good advice. So if that's what the Mishnah means when it's talking to a regular husband, let's say a moment earlier in the Mishnah, when the Mishnah was addressing a yovim, it's also an eitzah tova. Elder Rababa kasha. Rababa is shver because Rababa says that the only way to get around being able to sell is by divorcing her. That's very shver. So Rababa nami lakasha. Because mishum eva, like Chaim Shvi said, the reason why we don't let her do it is because of eva. Zokt Rashi, mishum eva, hamayachid leishtoi oy karka oy metalton. Anybody who's going to tell his wife, "I have your ksuba money ready to go," that's basically telling her, "I'm about to kick you out." Right? Otherwise, why is he so busy about it? He is putting a permanent anger in his wife against him. The Savra, she obviously thinks, why is my husband preparing already for the divorce? Obviously, Einov Noisim Begershin. He's already salivating over his get. That's why he's setting it up. But this guy who's divorcing his Yavama, he's only divorcing her because he wants to get around paying. So she won't be worried. So let's think about it. He has two options. He can either be miyachad ksuba. If he does that, she'll be angry at him for the rest of their lives. I see you're planning to divorce me. The other way he can do it is he can divorce her, sell, and take her back. Once he takes her back and patches it up, everything's good. So it's a better idea. So technically, Hitaka could be miyachad ksuba, but he's going to ruin his marriage because she'll always be angry at him, thinking that he's setting her up for divorce.
He only does it so he can sell assets. That's the only reason.
So you're telling me. So you're suggesting.
He's not really.
So you're suggesting. So you're suggesting that he should reason with her.
Yeah.
Okay. So I agree.
Here, give you a choice. Okay. Either I'm going to sell the asset and you let me sell the asset. Okay. Or I'm going to do the trick.
She says, "Over my dead body, divorce me.
Huh?
Divorce me." Right?
Sure enough.
And then he'll divorce her, and then she'll play hard to get for about 5 minutes,
Yeah.
and then he'll get her back again. Okay. So that's that.
Married her, does she give back the original ksuba?
No, it's a new deal.
It's a new deal. So what did we achieve?
That he could sell. He had $500 million. He had $500 million of properties that he could sell.
Doesn't she take that back?
No, that's his brother. That's his brother's nechassim. That wasn't nechassim look. That was his brother's assets, fair and square. Okay. You see what trouble a person's going to go through just to get his brother's assets? It went up in the meantime. Okay. So at the end of the day, we don't have a raya. The Gemara tried to bring a raya that you cannot say that nitna ksuba ligavos mechayim, because you could say nitna ksuba ligavos mechayim, yet still no one's going to recommend that eitzah to set aside money because it's going to lead to shalom bayis problems. Zok to Gemara vayter. Hahu Gavra, this is a very interesting story. Hahu Gavra, there was a person, Rahman al-Tzal, a brother died without children, but he left over 2 surviving brothers, not 1 surviving brother. Hahu Gavra, the Nafale Yavama B'Pumadisa. And he left over millions and millions, or $500 million he left over, and both brothers were eager to do the mitzvah of evil. So Hahu Gavra, the Nafila Yavama Bepumbedisa, and one brother was going to do Yibum, but the other brother wanted to stop him because he didn't want to lose his share. So boy Achva Lemilfsala Begitimine. He wanted to quickly give the Yavama a get. Once we learned in Yavamas, once any brother gives a get, now it's also for any of the brothers to do Yibum. So now no Yibum happens and we split it. So that's what this brother wanted to do.
Well, what about her and Yerusha? Would she only get the ksuba, they'd have to buy her out?
The ksuba's nothing. We want the $500 million worth of assets for the brother left over.
If he was worth 500 million, the ksuba was worth a lot more. She's not gonna
They still
take it.
wanted, they were
She's not
still.
gonna take it. She's not gonna take it.
She won't take the chalitza so easily. Good. But at the end of the day, one brother wanted to spoil it so that the other brother wouldn't be able to claim exclusive Yerusha on the brother's estate. So Amalei, so he tells his brother, Ma daitich, why do you want to mess up this Yibum? I'm doing it l'shem shemayim. I'm going to prove it to you. No, I'm going to prove it to you. Mishum nichsei, it's only about the money. I'm not b'nichsei b'liknoch. I'm happy to split in the chosam with you. I'm happy to give you half in the chosam. So I'm not doing it l'shem shemayim. I'll split it with you. The problem is he allowed to liquidate his brother's assets? He's not allowed to. Oh, so Zog to Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yosef, that won't work. Even the Amar Rabbanon, Lo Lizvin, since the Rabbanon said that you're not allowed to liquidate the assets of your brother when you do Yibum, then Avagav the Zovin will have a Zvini Zavini. So this brother was a smart cookie. Yeah, I'll give you half the assets, no problem. The Rabbanim said I can't do it. I'd love to do it. I asked the Rav. The Rav said I can't. I would do the second. In the second I would do it. And I only married her with shame, Shabbayah. Gewaltig. The Tanya we learned. The Tanya. Misha Mace. Someone who dies. You're right, he could tell his brother, he could tell his brother, either share with me the estate or I'll make her fall to me to Yibum. The Tanya. Misha Mace. Someone who dies, V'hiniach Shemer Shab, and he left over a wife who needs to do Yibum. V'hiniach Nechosim B'meya Mana, and he also left over assets worth 100 mana. Lo yimkar, they can. Even though her ksuba is only a mana, lo yimkar, you're not allowed to sell the excess. Shekol nechosov achroy luksubasa. All of the nechosim are achroyu to her ksuba. Amalei Abaye. So Abaye said, "V'chol heicha do amar rabbanon loy lizvin." Avagav the Zovan, Loyav Zvini. So the Rabbanan said you're not supposed to liquidate. The brother says, I don't care what the Rabbanan said. You do it anyway. It's going to work. The Ruv here, you're going to sell that, you're going to give me half the assets. Big deal. Who said it doesn't work? Zok the Gemara, what Nan we learned, they Shamay Oimim, Timkar, we still like Timkar. We're talking about a woman who has assets and she's an arusa, and we said Beis said she shouldn't sell, Beis Hillel she should sell. But Elu ve'elu moedim, they both agree. Sai Beis Shammai and Sai Beis Hillel agree. Shemacher v'nas nakayim. So you see clear that even though you're not supposed to do something, if you didn't listen, it will work anyway. So oy bezoi, how could this brother say, "I'm sorry, melosnish"? You could do it anyway, and it'll work. So shalchu l'kamed Rab Chanina bar Papi. So we have over here a dispute. Abaye said that it should work, and Rabbi Yosef said it shouldn't work. So we have a machlokes over here, Abaye and his Rebbe, right? Rabbi Yosef said that the sale shouldn't work, and Abaye is claiming the sale should work. So they decided the Shiloh went to Rabbi Chanina bar Papi, Shalcha to Rabbi Yosef, and he responded like Rabbi Yosef that the sale won't work, but he didn't provide any source reference to where he got this psak from. Amar Abaye, Adu Rab Chanina bar Papi, Kipi Talala. What does he have? Rashi says, Nizamim, does he have jewels around his neck? Claimer Bama Yifa Vehines, the verb. With what did he support and make his psak acceptable to us? Umatam Nosan Bakisha. What reasoning did he give to say that the sale shouldn't be able to work? So then Shalchula Kamed Rabban Yumi, Rabban Nechume, they send it to other Rabbanim. Shalcha Kid Abaye, and he sent it back like Abaye. Then of course, if they sell, it will work. The Amar Bar Rabbi Yosef, Time Achrina Shochli. If you hear Rabbi Yosef comes up with a justification for his psak that the mechira shouldn't work, let me know. I want to hear what he has to say. But just accepting it on its face, I'm not going to do that. Nafak Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef went out, dok v'ashkach, and he checked and he found. So the Mesivta once brought down, where does the word nafak, dok v'ashkach come from? Where did he go to find? So if you ever daven here at quarter to 10 Mariv in Aguda, you'll see that many Rebbeim are here from the Mesivta, and many Rebbeim are here from a Kabbalah Yeshiva, and from a Brayot Yeshiva, to look up the Mesivta, to look up the Art Scroll, to look up the Chavrusa. There's a lot of good Sfarim that they can't look up in Yeshiva because it's embarrassing. But over here, they can come look it up. So that's better not like Dok V'ashkach. In the times of the Gemara, you weren't supposed to write down the Mishnayos. It was an Eis Lasas Lashem Eferus Eresecha. But the big Talmid Chacham knew the Mishnayos and the Brises backwards and forwards in their heads. They didn't have to look it up. The people who are a little schwacher, they have to come to the Aguda at night and use the learning gate Svar. So that's how it was in those days as well. He left the Bismedish, he left Yeshiva, and he came to the Aguda to look up the Art Scroll. And that's where he found the Brises written down. Yeah, so he didn't remember all the Brises. He was allowed to go look up the Brises. So Pshat is, Avada, they have to know that lechatchila, it shouldn't be written down. And they should remember all the Mishnayos and Brises by heart. So therefore, there's nothing wrong with going to look up. You have to go look up. You need to know the information. But as Zoivai, there should be an anakenon. It should be noticeable that we're looking it up in a different way, because we have to at least realize to ourselves that the best thing would be, the ultimate would be if we remembered ourselves. So that's why the Nofak Dok Vash. The time we learned, if someone owed his brother money, umeis, and his brother died. So he owed his brother $100,000. His brother dies without children. So now if he's going to do Yivam, he just yashin his brother. So now, if he just yashin his brother, he shouldn't have to pay him back anymore, because now I yashined everything. So and he left over a wife. He shouldn't say, I owed him $100,000. Since I'm yashing him, I have that $100,000, and therefore I can use that $100,000 and spend it. And I don't have to lock it up as part of my brother's estate. I can now spend it. I'll keep it. You take it away from the oven, and you put it as part of the estate. And the yigach ben karka, he'll have to buy karka, but who oichel payers. So zok the Gemara. So you see very clearly a brisa. Moitziin miyovim the yigach ben karka. So you see clearly that you force it. So here's the raya that even if he tries to sell, you take it away from him and you force him, because it's moitziin miyovim. You force it out of the oven, and you force it. Even though he has it already, you force him to put it into the state. So by the same token, if you sell it, we will force it and take it back. What is the raya from there that you're actually forcing it? Maybe Dilma de Tavale Avdule. So Rashi, it's a toiva. They're doing him a favor. Maybe we're giving him good advice. Cash is never good. If you put cash in your wife's purse, it's gone. If you put cash and buy a property with it, it's going to remain there. So maybe it's giving him good advice. You see the way we always have good advice here in the Gemara. Amar Le, I don't understand. This is not advice. Tana tani moitzian. It says moitzian. You force the money out of him. That amrit the tavale Abdullah. You're telling me they're just doing him a favor? So you have a good raya. Harder shalchua kamedir abin yomi b'reidir abin chume. Amar Li. Hachi Amar Rabbi Yosef Bar Yume Amar Rab Nachman. So when they sent him, they said, if you have a raya to Rabbi Yosef, send me. So they sent him this. So and they showed Rabbi Yosef, in fact, that we have a brisa that proves that you're right, that we reverse the mechira. But Rabbi Yosef said that's not. Rabbi Yosef Bar Yume said that's not a right. Hachi Amar Rabbi Yosef Bar Yume Amar Rab Nachman Zu Ein Mishnah. You have a very good raya from that brisa. But that brisa is not reliable, and you can ignore the brisa. You can ignore the brisa. My timer. What is it that you saw in this Mishnah that proves to you that this Mishnah is not reliable, and you can't bring a raya from it? What wrong is there in this Mishnah? If it's because the money that this guy is holding, the brother owes, is metaltal, it's not karka. And anyway, this wouldn't be relevant to the ksuba. Why is it that we take that money and we make him put it in the karka so that you remain protected to pay up her ksuba? It's metalton. It's never anyway part of what's collateral for a ksuba. That's not a kasha, because maybe this brisa Dilmo Rab Mary, maybe this bride holds like Reb Meir, the Omer metaltli mishabda l'ksuba. That metaltli is mishubah to the ksuba. And even though we might not hold like Reb Meir, but the Mishnah is still legit. And if the Mishnah is legit, then if it comes to a karka issue, you would take it away from him. So that halacha that you force him not to sell, that halacha remains. We might not agree with Reb Meir about metaltli, but the general halacha that we could extract from this price is legit, and therefore we have a good riot. So why is Rabbi Yosef Bar Menyumi discounting this price? Vela, there's another problem with this price. You should the Amar law. He could tell her, "You can't make me put that money back." At lav bal dvarim diat. You're not my bal dvarim. I have nothing to do with you. So Rashi, you know why this must be a mistake? Misha Shana, the person who cited this price, must be mistaken. Mishum demotzi Amar law. He can tell her, "Lav balas dvarim diat." I didn't borrow a penny from you. I borrowed money from my brother. So don't mix in to my cheshbon. So therefore, this psak is not a good psak. Zok to Gemara, what are you talking about?
Did he have a prosbo from the loan from his brother?
I'm sorry?
Did he have a prosbo from the loan from his brother?
He must have. The Amr Rab Nosson, it's going according to Rab Nosson, the famous Shibud of Rab Nosson, that she does have a claim directly against him through her husband. The Tanya Rab Nosson Omer, Minayin l'noisha b'chaveri mona, b'chaveri, Minayin shemoitziin mizev v'nois l'mazeh. If A owes B and B owes C, then C can collect directly from A, because Talmud Loimer, it says v'nosan lasher osham loy. The pasuk doesn't say give the money to the person who you borrowed from. It says give the money to the person who's owed. Why doesn't it say give the money back to the person you borrowed from? Sometimes you don't give the money back to the person you borrowed from. You give it back to the person who's owed the money, who's at the top of the food chain, because your bachoy might owe money to somebody else. So that's also, so you can't say that it's not a good psak in the brisa, because he could say la bal dvarim didat, because she can say shenayin mulam your bal dover, because you owe your brother owes me. Ella, what it is the problem is the combination of the two. Ella loy achchantana the machmer trei chomer b'ksuba. We're going on the side that ksuba is only derabbanan, and we don't find anybody who will have two chumras in a ksuba that's only derabbanan. In other words, you can only collect if you combine two different shitas. Sai the shita of Rab Nosson and Sai the shita of Rab Meir. That's too much. We wouldn't. Nobody for ksuba derabbanan would actually make him pay her that money back by putting together two different shitas. Ella, Iker Rab Meir, Iker Rab Nosson. Yes, you can pass like Rab Meir, you can pass like Rab Nosson, but to take money out of him relying on two shitas hayochid, that we would not do, and therefore in the Mishnah. So even though the Brisa seems to indicate that you could force him to give the money back, that's not a reliable Mishnah. Now that you've proven that this Mishnah is not reliable, now we know what Abaye meant when Abaye said the Amar Zu in the Mishnah. When Abaye said that Mishnah is not reliable, I didn't know why it wasn't reliable. But now that you've explained it, because it's combining two shitas to be machmer by a derbanon, I understand what Abaye meant, that you can't trust this Mishnah. So Abaye maintains that he could give his brother half the assets. He could do the yibum and he can give his brother half the assets, even though it's not correct to do, but it will still work. Okay, we'll stop here. I want to wish everybody a ksivich, simatayva, a git ben shtiyar. We should be zorich to finish noch mesechtes, and noch yom tovim. We should always be able to learn together with the Geshmak. And I want to that again. I feel so good, even so from a social perspective, besides the learning, it's Geshmak to be part of a chavre, and I really appreciate the friendship. Thank you.
Are we learning? Yosy.
Yes.
Are we learning tomorrow?
Yeah, we're going to be learning an hour before the first mincha tomorrow.